Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So on day 3 of Kubernetes series, today we are going to understand about namespaces. So let's understand. So what is namespaces? A namespace is like a mini cluster inside your main Kubernetes cluster. It helps you to keep things separate and organized. So what does it mean basically? So namespaces generally we use to isolate our resources. For example, we have a single Kubernetes cluster in our organization or in our company, and we have suppose we have four teams, and all the four teams is going to use that Kubernetes cluster. What happen if you will not use namespaces? In that case everything will be in default namespace, because when you create a Kubernetes cluster, Kubernetes automatically create a default namespaces where all the resources will be available, and whatever you are going to create, that also will go inside a default namespaces. So to manage multiple resources inside single namespaces is quite a big challenge basically. So what generally we does, for each team or each department we create a separate namespace, and those teams basically will have access on their particular namespace itself. So they can create resources like pods, deployment, services, whatever they want to create, they will create inside their namespace only. So likewise we use namespaces to isolate resources inside a single Kubernetes clusters. It is not like if you have a single Kubernetes cluster, then only you can use namespaces. Ideally, a best practice is you have to use namespaces when you are going to create your resources inside Kubernetes cluster. So this is what I have tried, one image here. So you can see this is the very big Kubernetes cluster here we have, and under this Kubernetes cluster we have three namespaces: marketing, development, and development. So marketing teams will have their own resources inside this namespace. Development will have their own resources. So if they want to talk to each other, they can do, because we can enable a cross namespace communication as well. So that is not an issue. But if we are using a separate namespaces for each team or each or separate projects for separate projects, in that case basically we are organizing our resources very meaningfully, and it is help us to also to manage those resources, because we know, okay, all the resources what we have created or we are going to create, that will be available inside this particular namespace. So for troubleshooting, well, it helps in a lot of sense basically. So it is a good practice whenever you are going to create any resources. It could be your pod, deployment, services, stateful sites, demo set, whatever it is, you have to use a namespace to create that particular resource. Okay, why do we need namespace? So as we discussed, for isolation, so each team will have their own namespace, so they can create resources inside that particular namespace. And when it comes to access part, suppose we have three namespace: dev, test, and prod. We don't want to give everybody to access the prod namespace, because there we are running our live environment. So we don't want many people's access on prod namespace. So like that we basically restrict the access as well for the people. Organizations, so this is already we have discussed, like as soon as your cluster will grow or your organization will grow or multiple projects you are going to handle, so if you will have a namespaces, then it will be easy for you to manage the resources. Another important thing is resource limit. You can set a resource limit as well on a particular namespace level. Okay, for this namespace I am going to allocate this much of CPU, this much of RAM, so it will basically not consume entire what is resource for your particular Kubernetes clusters. So we can divide, or we can distribute, or we can allocate a particular resource limit as well to particular namespace. So only within those limits your resource will be created. And access control, RVAC, so that we already discussed, like we can give a permission based on namespaces level as well. Okay, so what is default namespace? So when we create a Kubernetes cluster, by default we get few namespaces. So the very first one is default namespaces. This is where your app goes. So whenever we create any resources without specifying a namespace, in that case everything we are going to create inside default namespace. And these are the Kubernetes cluster components, or I would say control plane namespaces: kube systems, kube public, and kube nodeless. So we should not touch all these three kube namespaces, namespaces, because they are the system components which is basically which will reside inside these namespaces. We will see in demonstrations by default are we getting all these four names in the namespaces or not. Okay, so there are few tips and best practices for namespaces. So avoid using only the default namespace. So as we discussed, project wise, team wise, or maybe department wise, we have to use a separate namespace. We have to use separate namespace. We should not rely on a default namespace. That is very important thing. Communication across namespace. So pod in one namespace cannot talk to pod in another namespace just by using the service name, but we can allow a communication with fully qualified domain name. So for example, if my service name is my service dot my namespace dot svc dot cluster dot local, so this is the fully qualified name, like full name basically we have to use to enable a communication between two namespaces. So that we will see in later videos, because that is little advanced topic. Here we are starting from very basics, so we are not directly going to much deeper. And another best practice, group related resources. So like we should organize resources based on, like, if it's a dev resources, prod resources, UAT resources, so like that we have to group all the resources and we have to keep in a particular namespace. Okay, now let's move to a demonstration part. So in GitHub repo there is a folder called day3. Here you will get a sample a sample pod.ml file which we are going to use as part of this demonstration, and also I have mentioned the steps as well which we are going to follow. So if you want to do hands-on in your local machine, you can do that. Okay, so now first thing what we will do, first we will see how many namespaces we have by default. So now let me go to my Visual Studio Code, and here let me cross verify if my Kubernetes cluster is running. Okay, my cluster is running. So now first thing we will verify how many default namespaces we have. So if I'll search here kubectl get namespaces, so you can see by default we have 4 namespaces which we have seen in a presentation as well. So these three we should not use, or we should not touch basically, because all the system related components or controllers run on these namespaces, and whatever the resources we created, everything will go inside default namespaces. To just verify if we are going to create any pod, where it is going to reside. So what we will do, let me quickly create a simple pod.ml file, and here let me search, type API version which is v1 kind, we are going to create pod. Okay, now metadata. So under metadata let me give a name. So name will be give any name, my app. Now under specifications, so we have to define a container name. So container name, again I'll give same name, my -app. It's fine, you can give any name. And next we will specify an image. So again we will use nginx image, latest. Okay, now let me save it. Now if I'll run this command, let me clear it. kubectl apply -f and our file name which is pod.ml. So it is created a single pod. So to verify kubectl get pod, so we have a single pod which is running, but we are not sure under which namespaces this pod is running. So for that, what we will use command kubectl get pods not equal to, sorry, hyphen all hyphen namespaces. Let me run it. Okay, unknown surrounding flag a. So we have already used, okay, so here should be double hyphen, not single. Okay, so these are the namespaces we can see, and we can see our pod, which is my app, which is running inside default namespaces. So that's how we can check our application, like our deployment services or pod, under which namespaces it is running. If suppose this is the single pod name we have, like we know, okay, we have only single application pod, so we have easily identified it. So now what we will do next, let me clear the screen and let me also delete this pod kubectl delete pod and pod name, which is my app. So we have deleted this pod which was in default namespace. So now what we will do, we will create a new namespace. So there are two ways to create a namespace. First thing, you can create a manifest file. That is also fine. Ideally that's the best practice, but this is just a demonstration. So we are going to create a namespace with a simple command. So let me create a namespace kubectl create namespace, and we will give a name as dev. So we have created a namespace called dev. So to verify, we will again run kubectl get namespaces. So now we have two namespaces, default and dev. Now what we will do, under metadata, I will add a object here for namespaces, and here I will give a name which is dev. Dev is our namespace which we have created. So now this pod which we will create now, that will go and sit inside dev namespace. So to verify it, let me save it first and let me clear the console. Now if I run kubectl apply -f and other file name. Now if I simply search kubectl get pods, sorry, not pods, okay, it's the spelling mistake, kubectl get pods. So you can see no resources found in default namespaces. So by default, when we create anything, any object inside Kubernetes cluster, that will directly go and sit inside a default namespace. So to verify our pod which is in under dev namespace, what we have to do, we have to simply pass here name, which is the shortened form of namespace, and we will use our namespace name, which is dev. So if I run this command, we will see, okay, now my pod is running in dev namespace. Earlier it was created under default namespace. So that's how, if you have 100 or 1000 of resources inside your Kubernetes cluster, then it is very complex to manage those resources. So it is a best practice, always use namespaces when you are going to create any resources inside a Kubernetes cluster. So I think it's clear. In case if you have any doubts, you can ping me over comments box as well. And also I have created this GitHub repos for day 3, so you can find a sample file as well here. So if you want to do hands-on, you can do that. So that's all for today. See you next video. Thank you so much.